Okay, good morning, everybody. It's Saturday, September 26th. We're on day 2 of the State Road 36 shutdown. That's going to be east of Mad River and right at the 3 and 36. I've got 2 special guests today. Brooke Taber from our incident meteorologist. He'll give us the critical weather update. And then off in the wings is Mike Weaver. He's the public safety specialist for the Pacific Gas and Electric, and he'll be talking about a powering down, a public safety power down that'll happen on the east side. First guest, Brooke. Everybody's heard about the wind that's coming up. We have a red flag warning, I believe, starting tonight.
Yeah, that is correct. We have that red flag warning in effect from 5 a.m. Sunday morning through noon on Monday. So let's get into some of the details. Today is relatively quiet in the world of weather, very similar to what we saw yesterday as far as relative humidity, temperature, and winds. Not a lot of change there. We'll help their burnout operations up in the 36 corridor with that. As we get into tonight, that is when we're going to start noticing the changes. The first thing that will change is the change in wind direction. Northwest today turns around to the north as we get into the overnight hours, and then northeast, which is an offshore wind direction from northeast to southwest. And what does an offshore wind do? First, it's going to increase. We're going to look at speeds as we get into around sunrise tomorrow, 15 to 20 miles per hour with localized gusts to 25 or so. Those localized gusts will be confined to the South Fork mountain ridges and some pinch points here along the 36 corridor, mainly west of Forest Glen. We could experience those 25 mile per hour wind gusts. As we go through the day, we get some surface heating Sunday, midday, mid-afternoon. That surface heating, what that wants to do is expand the wind profiles and help to get better mixing. So as we go through the day, we'll see some stronger winds. We're looking at 30 to 35 miles per hour, especially along the South Fork mountain ridges. A little bit of concern here in the Ruth, Mad River Valley. As that air wants to rise, it's going to come down slope along this terrain here. So these fingers where there's fire is sort of spreading could see some enhanced winds, 25, 30 miles per hour. Another area of concern as you go up to the 36 corridor, get into that higher terrain near Forest Glen, the terrain wants to converge there, come together, and that may help to create some funneling and enhanced winds of 30, 35 miles per hour in that area. With those winds, Cale, we're going to see very low RHs. Relative humidity values tomorrow afternoon in the teens. As we go through the afternoon, temperatures will warm into the 80s. Think the conditions continue overnight. The winds will continue from the east-northeast overnight, but the strongest winds will be above about 5,000 feet. The South Fork ridges and this pinpoint around the 36 will experience those strong winds. And unfortunately, nighttime, the recoveries are going to be very poor.
So we could have a burn throughout the night. So folks who are concerned about Ruth, the fire crews have been bringing fire to fill out these little edges here. They're doing that actively the last 3 days, and especially today, so that they can button that up and hold it. So the wind comes, we're in a holding pattern instead of a burning pattern, right? So that's one big note for the Ruth folks. And we do have a lot of air support to help with that. That way, if you had any spots into Ruth, the helicopters that you've been seeing on YouTube, they'll be able to pinpoint, knock those out. For the folks in Post Mountain, really good wind day yesterday because it blew the wind actually right over our Wild Spike and back towards Redding. And it was very clear, more or less, in Post Mountain. So that was a good burn day. Today, they'll take advantage of that, right? And we'll bring fire down to the 36 road off of Rattlesnake. Lots of air support yesterday. Yeah. Very large air tankers, single engine air tankers, fire boss tankers, the mass ships from the military. Everybody was out here helping to paint this landscape to get ready for today. And how will that impact them?
Yeah, you bring up a good point about the air support tomorrow. Just a heads up there, their threshold is 25 miles per hour for flying. So we're going to be coming close to those thresholds, especially in the afternoon and evening hours when those RHs are the lowest and the temperatures are the warmest. So they've been briefed on that. Ops knows about that too. So the air show may come to a halt as those winds increase, unfortunately, tomorrow afternoon. So it's going to be a little bit of a balancing act as we go through the afternoon and into the evening hours.
So then our backup plan to air, and in fact our primary plan to put out a fire is always boots on the ground. So those engine crews that we have in Ruth, if they see a spot fire, they can head out there, hike out there, put fire line around it. They can use the engines to spray hose. And then also we have the tenders. And so if you're a YouTuber, you'll see that, like, for example, the Ruth store has 2 big orange blivets in front of it and then a couple tenders parked there. They'll be filling up those. Engine crews can draw those and go out and get the spot fires. Thanks for that, Brooke. We're going to go ahead and jump right into Mike Weaver because we are always going to come back to Brooke. He's one of our all-stars. He's done 3 live feeds for us, and we always appreciate that, Brooke, because we know everybody wants to know about the weather. Now, Mike had a 35-year career with CAL FIRE. He's the specialist who helps PG&E determine what to do on the big wind front, right, Mike?
Yes.
And the good news that I heard from you earlier when you were briefing the team, the highest winds won't actually be over the fire tomorrow. They'll be east in the Sacramento Valley, and that's where you have your shutdown. But maybe you can break it down for folks and explain who maybe haven't tuned into their power bill pamphlet that you put in and all the public service announcements that you do, because you have been thorough the last several years explaining how this works, right?
Yes. Thanks, Cal. Good morning, everybody. Mike Weaver, Public Safety Specialist with PG&E. I'm coordinating with the Alaska Incident Management Team on PG&E's efforts in a public safety power shutoff event, PSPS, that is going to occur tonight, roughly around midnight, affecting 16 California counties, impacting nearly 100,000 customers throughout our service territory. Specifically, what I want to go into details on what is a public safety power shutoff. A public safety power shutoff is a utility company like PG&E, our last resort to prevent catastrophic wildfires and the loss of life to the public in response to those large wildfires. So a public safety power shutoff, the criteria for that is when our assets, overhead electrical, are subjected to 25-mile-an-hour sustained winds with gusts exceeding 45 miles an hour over a particular duration of time. And those are what we call outage-producing winds. And when those winds meet those thresholds, this is where we see vegetation from trees breaking off, flying into the conductors, and touching those conductors phase to phase, or hitting that conductor and bringing it to the ground, which potentially could cause an ignition. So the details about the public safety power shutoff event. Fortunately, I could say that we do not anticipate de-energizing any assets over the north zone of the August complex. The west side of the Sacramento Valley is currently out of scope, but what is impacted...
Out of scope meaning lower winds?
Out of scope meaning we will not be de-energizing any overhead electrical distribution or transmission assets. So this area is not going to be affected currently by the current public safety power shutoff. What is going to be impacted are the eastern side of Shasta County in the communities of Shingletown on the Highway 44 corridor, and in Tehama County that affects Manton and the mineral areas from the 1,000 foot to 5,000 foot level. When I talked about the 16 counties, the 16 counties include Shasta County south all the way to Kern County, where Kern County may see the effects of winds by the Santa Ana event later Sunday evening into Monday. The scope of that event, the winds, as Brooke described from incident meteorology, are supposed to arrive around the 0500 hours period Sunday morning early. However, Pacific Gas and Electric Company starts de-energizing our assets at around midnight tonight because it takes us a period of hours to de-energize all those lines prior to the arrival of the outage producing winds. We don't want to shut it off when the winds are here. We want to shut them off well before. So again, this is for the east side of the Sacramento Valley, not impacting any of the Bridgeville Cottonwood 115 K transmission circuit. It will not impact the distribution circuit in Ruth, nor will it impact the distribution circuit in Wildwood that does feed your our Wild Horse Ranch base camp.
That big base camp.
That is correct. So PG&E continues to work with the incident management team, providing them daily updates on the scope of the event in external situation reports. We've communicated with them on this morning's 0700 hour. We will get another situational report we will give to your team at 1400 hours.
Great. Now, hang on one second because we do have Aubrey working the questions and answers. If there are any, you can put them here. what circumstance would the fire activity cause PG&E to power down? So for example, if we didn't have the great winds yesterday that blew the fire away from Post Mountain into itself so the hotshots could bring it down to the road, and it was the opposite, fire launching over 36, getting established, a firefight, would the power line you just talked about, the 115,
115
would
kV.
that stay open?
Okay, so we have coordinated efforts with the operations staff for the Alaska team. Yesterday we had a transmission troubleman meet with your operation folks at drop point 147 to determine a plan.
That's right around Post Mountain, the Trinity Pines Road?
That is correct. Our transmission troubleman met with John Glover
Yep.
and others to talk about if the fire impacts Highway 36 and jumps that highway, there is a plan in place to prevent what we call a ground phase, where the smoke goes through the conductors, the power lines, and the density of that smoke can bring electricity from the conductor to the ground, causing a ground fault, which would de-energize that line and put firefighters at risk if that occurs. So if the firing operation, if there are any issues with that fire operation or heavy smoke or the fire jumps the highway, operations has a plan in place to contact our transmission troubleman to de-energize that line for firefighter and public safety prior to the smoke getting really dense through the conductors.
Okay, I think most folks at home probably think it's the fire burning the poles,
Yeah.
or the fire, or a tree hitting it. That smoke, because that smoke yesterday sheared right down. When I drove the 36 down to R Wild and then Bowman and then back up, boy, right when you hit just before R Wild, it was like you could start choking on it.
Sure.
It was that thick and outside of that zone. And folks from Hayfork know that, right? Because they're seeing sheared columns of smoke. So are we talking about that density when it's hard to see a couple hundred yards?
No, the real density comes from the very thick black smoke from active burning. Not so much the drift smoke, but it's the heavy carbon particles in the active burning fire that get in the conductors and cause those particles to bring electricity from the conductor to the ground, which is where electricity wants to go. You talked about the poles. This entire transmission line through the north side of the fire is all on steel towers, big steel lattice towers that don't generally burn. They don't burn. We've had major wind events from the Carr fire in 2018. The tornado took down very large steel lattice towers because of the wind velocity of over 100 miles an hour from that tornado, brought those structures to the ground. We don't anticipate that type of late season fire activity up at this elevation. We'll knock on wood when we say that. But generally the towers are not an issue because they are steel. And then there is a very large cleared right-of-way around that transmission line where trees should not be an issue.
I've seen that when you're driving, you can see your nice, for us it's like a fuel break, right? It's great to see those. And we're using the Forest Service fuel break around Post Mountain Trinity Pines. So anytime a fire crew can get to a fuel break, ideally then it's been proactively shut down and they can use it. In Alaska, we have to fight fire in the pipeline quite a bit, but it's also a fuel break.
Big cleared right away,
because they keep it clear. So one last question for you, Mike, is I know folks up here are going to be curious. Doesn't Post Mountain get its own power?
Post Mountain does not
utility?
get power from Pacific Gas and Electric Company. Their power comes from the Trinity Public Utilities District.
Okay.
So even if the scope of the PSPS event changed, Post Mountain would not be impacted because their power comes from sources north of this location, Hayfork, Weaverville, and the Lewiston Dam, which is where their generation is.
So not the 115 line.
The 115 line is PG&E, which feeds Wildwood, Low Gap, and Bridgeville. We do have the source on our 115 kV line to backfeed to the Forest Glen sub, but their primary source of generation comes from the north from Lewiston Dam. We provide a backup should that generation go down. But in this case, if this line had to go down for firefighter or public safety or for PSPS, Post Mountain would still receive power from an alternate source from Weaverville.
Okay, well, this has been extremely informative. Mike's here at the command post every single day as part of what we call our cooperators. as a power utility or the sheriff's office or all the different folks who have dogs in the fight, who have a part of this, who want to keep the public safe, who are actively here. You're here every single day.
Yes.
So if you do have questions, folks, we have our information crew. We have Josh behind the camera, Aubrey behind the computer, and a whole room of folks here and in Alaska working to answer those questions. So put them here. We'll see Mike tomorrow morning, and we can give you answers to anything that's outstanding. But it's kind of neat to know how this all works. It's neat to know that the power company is going to stay really tuned into the firefighters and what we're doing. And right now, let's just pray that the wind, even though it's going to be a high wind, keeps blowing the fire back into itself. We have a really good firefight in Ruth. So we have a plan for Ruth again, folks. We know that that wind's pointing at it now, but it's been a multi-day firefight. So let's just pray that all goes well, and we appreciate all your support. Thank you.